support hub session, which is on myth busting. We'd like to record this as we have done with all the other sessions. So if nobody's got an issue with that, then we'll go ahead and do that. If you have, could you make yourself known in some way, either to me or to Mike, or just generally to us, because Mike's about to press record. So we're off and running. No problems. Okay, so it's you've got the same panel again. You've got me, you've got Mike Carter, who's in on the evidence ones and the CPD and reflection and things like that, and Tamina Hussain, who's been in on most of them so far. So it's the same old faces again. We're cropping up again, but hopefully we're going to be able to bust some myths today in lots of different areas. So I'm going to kick off with some of the myths that I've heard, and I know that Mike's got a few at the end, and then we'll open it up so that you can ask, and if you've got any questions that you want clarified or anything, we can answer them and hopefully bust a few more. So I'm going to crack on with my first one, and we're probably going to have to wait for my screen because it slows right down when we do this. Yeah, I'm going to have to do it old school. Okay, so what we can do is, if you can find at the bottom of your screen, or maybe at the top of your screen, you should have the ability to do a thumbs up or a sort of an open mouth, definitely not type response. And it might be useful if some of you throw in what you think about some of these myths. So the first one is, your portfolio can only have 30 pieces of evidence in it. How are people feeling about that? Thumbs up. Absolutely. Your portfolio can only have 30 pieces of evidence in it. That's not 28, 29, 34. That's 30 pieces. You wouldn't believe the number of people who ask me how many pieces of evidence they can have in their portfolio. The IBMS only allows one side of A4 for a piece of evidence. Thoughts on that? Everybody agree? Is that what everybody believes? No, that's absolutely not true. I know where this myth came from. It was a conversation at a training session that we did, and somebody said about how what evidence should look like and how much evidence you can use. And we were describing pieces of evidence, and we said it may be that everything fits on one sheet of A4 and meets the standard, and that's absolutely fine. So it could be something like an annotated set of results, with annotation all around the outside, and a holistic piece of evidence just on that sheet of A4. That is absolutely fine. What it's translated into is the IBMS only allows one side of A4. It's all about quality rather than quantity. If that quality is one side of A4, then that's fine. If it's a few sides of A4, that's fine also. It doesn't just have to be the one side, as long as it's not 400 pages for one piece of evidence. Training officers are responsible for undertaking all of the training. True, false? No, they're not responsible for undertaking all of the training. They are responsible for overseeing all of the training. So if you are, as a training officer, if you're subcontracting some parts of the training to another member of staff, maybe a member of support staff in specimen resection, something like that, you must, as a training officer, you must make sure that they are training to the right level. So their scope of practice may be different to the expectation of the scope of practice of the trainee biomedical scientists that they're training up. But you, as a training officer, do not have to undertake all of that training yourself. You may not be the most appropriate person. So we're quite happy for you to hand over that training to the most appropriate person, as long as they fully understand what they're training to, the level of the standards that they're training to and what they need to cover. It is your responsibility as a training officer for making sure that it's done to the right level and for signing it off. So ensuring that the trainee does meet all the standards, but you don't necessarily have to do all the training yourself. One of the 30 pieces of evidence has to be a reflective statement on my interaction with service users, learning with and from other professionals. Now, hopefully everybody should know that's true. I still get, even after 5 years of the version 4 portfolio, I still get verifiers contacting me to say that they've undertaken a verification, they've looked in the portfolio, and this piece of mandatory evidence is missing. You do have to do it. It is the single piece of mandatory evidence in the whole of the portfolio. So please make sure with your training officer or verifier hat on that that piece of evidence is there and is identifiable. Crazy mouse. As a verifier would be responsible for removing laboratory approval. Absolutely not. You are, as a verifier, if you're going into a laboratory or you're assessing a laboratory as part of one of our assessments, you are my eyes and ears to what's going on in that laboratory and the kind of training experience that's going on there. But you nor I would be responsible for removing the laboratory approval if there is a problem there. What would happen is you would feedback on the verifier or the examiner report form, or contact me directly if you're really concerned, and I would investigate. I'd speak to all the various different parties concerned. So I would speak to you as the verifier or examiner. I would have a look at the report, and then I would present it to the laboratory. I take extracts of it to present to the laboratory to ask them for their response to it. And then I would create a report that goes to our Education and Professional Standards Committee. They will discuss it and make a decision on whether the laboratory keeps the laboratory approval. It is absolutely not the role of the verifier or the examiner to make that decision. It's not taken lightly. I have had a number of laboratories that I've had to investigate. I have had a few cases that have actually gone to the Education and Professional Standards Committee. And what we tend to do, we've never removed laboratory approval. We work with the laboratories, we build a plan in place, and we work through it to get them sorted out and to get the training up and sorted and everything. So, but please don't let that put you off of verifying or examining because you feel that it's your responsibility to actually make that decision around the laboratory continued laboratory approval. Timings must be the same regardless of whether I'm doing a virtual assessment or an old style face-to-face one. This is an interesting one, and this is, I get a lot of emails about this following the move to virtual assessment, where people are concerned that verifiers and examiners might be spending much longer scrutinising a portfolio because they get them beforehand. It's not done on the day itself. They're very concerned that there's probably a higher level of scrutiny going on. That is absolutely not the case. We have a process for assessment approved by the HCPC, as you know, because we're an education provider for them, and we have to stick to that process. So our process says between 60 and 90 minutes to review a portfolio, regardless of whether you're sitting in a quiet room near the laboratory on site or whether you're sitting in your living room or your study and you're looking through an electronic portfolio. If, of course, you find that you've got a problem with the portfolio that you're looking through, then I think that should generate a bit of thought about how you're going to go back to the training officer, and then some dialogue between the training officer, you as a verifier, and the candidate. So that will factor in and above the 90 minutes, but please don't use 2 weeks. If you've got the portfolio for 2 weeks before the tour, please don't use that 2 weeks for doing what I'm going to refer to as a red pen job all over it. And scrutinize every little typo, you know, mark up every little typo or anything. That's not what it's for. You should be spending the same amount of time as you would do if you were on site there. I have had this before. verifiers consider themselves current, and then when there's been a problem, maybe they've asked a question and the training officer's come back and said, why would my verifier ask that? We haven't asked that for years, or we haven't done that for years. And you go back to the verifier and you say, when did you do your last training session? And I had one a while ago. They said, I did one 9 years ago. Obviously, it's important to remain current. We are moving at quite a pace actually in education now, in the way that we undertake the assessments and the information that we give out. So please make sure that as a verifier and examiner you are current, and I'd like to move to a requirement that training is updated ideally on an annual basis, maybe not attendance at a full training day, but certainly some kind of update just to keep people current. We can't do that. We can't mandate that at the moment because we don't have a way of doing it. But I would like to move to that so that we know that verifiers are remaining current. But I would say that if you haven't had a training day for at least 3 years, that you book onto one of the training update sessions in the new year, because we do move at quite a pace and things are changing. So it would be good for you to keep up to date with it. I get this one quite a lot as well, where training officers are under pressure. So do you think it's okay to, as a with your training officer hats on, do you think it's okay to put people forward even though you're being pressurized to do that? The answer is no. As a training officer, it's your responsibility to make sure that your candidate is ready for the assessment. And if you do not believe that they're ready for that assessment, do not put them forward. Every candidate should go forward with the expectation that they will be assessed and passed. If you don't think they're in the right place for it, if they're not ready, then please do block that application. I do think there's various different motivations for getting it. Trainees often feel that they want things to move faster and that they think that they're capable of assessing when they're ready. But I would say to any trainees, listen to your training officer. If your training officer is telling you to draw it back and calm down a bit, then really listen to them, because they are the experienced ones. And if your manager, some managers are under pressure to put people through to get them registered, and sometimes with specialist portfolios to get them onto things like 24/7 working. So there's a certain amount of pressure to get people moving through their portfolios. If as a training officer you aren't convinced that the person is going to pass, then please have the difficult conversation. Please do talk it through with your manager or your trainee, depending on where the pressure is coming from. Don't put them through with the possibility that they could fail, because we really don't want that to happen. We don't want people to fail. We don't want people to be in that position. We really want to think that if they're going through, they are going to be successful. Oh, we get lots and lots. The team get lots and lots of emails with this on. And is it the team's fault? I'm hoping nobody's saying yes out there. I can only see a couple of people down the side, so I'm really, really hoping that people aren't blaming the team. We, being a verifier and an examiner, it's obviously all on a volunteer basis, and we can only allocate once people step forward to undertake examinations or verifications. So we can process the application for examination and verification, but we can't allocate unless somebody's come forward to offer to do them. We're allocating on a first come first serve basis now. We're not doing it through the geographical locality as we used to, but we absolutely just rely on people stepping forward. This week, last week we advertised something like 77 verifications are waiting to be done, and this week we've had 2 verifiers come forward to help. So as you can see, you might be looking at a long list each week. If you're on the verifier or examiner list and you receive the emails, you might be looking at a high number of verifications and examinations waiting to be undertaken. But it's not necessarily because we're not moving the work through. Quite often, in fact, almost all of the time, it's because we are absolutely reliant on people having the time and the availability to step up and help us out, volunteer for the assessments that we're asking for. Whoop. crazy mouse again. We get quite a few people who, frustrated at the lack of speed and turnarounds of the allocation for verifications, who find somebody nearby who's prepared to do the verification. Can we accept that? The answer to that is no. We have to allocate verifiers and examiners. It's very difficult. We need to ensure that all the candidates get a fair and equitable experience. And what we don't want to do is leave locally arranged verifications or examinations open to allegations of a conflict of interest. And unfortunately, I have had to deal with the investigations that are associated with those, where a laboratory has asked a local verifier to step in and do their verifications, and somebody else made quite a serious allegation about the relationship between the verifier who had stepped in and the training officer and laboratory manager. So we need to remove anything like that, any allegation of conflict of interest or anything like that. So we allocate on the first come, first served basis, as we are at the moment doing the virtual verifications. So we will allocate them as fast as we can. We are doing our best. As I said to you before, we are totally reliant on people volunteering to help us out. We've got a turnaround time at the moment of about 3 weeks for verifiers to step up and us being able to allocate to them. Pre-COVID, with the old style verifications, we were looking at a turnaround normally around 12 weeks. So even though we've got a slight delay at the moment, it's much better than it was pre-COVID old style verification. But please don't feel that you can organise your own verifications locally, because we're unable to accept those. Sorry, Mike, I've just noticed your hand go up.
No, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat coming through, and there's a comment made by Vicky on the previous point of verifiers not keeping up to date and then relying on verifiers coming forward. Can the IBMS set a minimum number per year that must be done to stay competent, even just 1 or 2?
We like to recommend that people do at least 2 a year, really, to remain current and keep up with it. But we're not allowed. We're not allowed to mandate that they do 2 a year. So we just, we strongly recommend. We have some who do a huge number. We had one verifier who's recently retired who did over 500 verifications for us. So we have some who do lots and lots. And then we have other people who, because of work, can't do them for a long period, and then might step up and do 1 or 2 just to get their hands in. But ideally, if you can help out by doing 2 a year, that's absolutely fantastic. That's great. But we can't mandate at the current time how many. Okay, the questions at the beginning of the verifier report, who sat through those and answered them and thought this? Does everybody know the questions that I'm talking about? There's right at the beginning of a verification, there are a long list of questions that you have to go through that ask things like, what would the candidate do if they felt they had a grievance? What about their induction, what happened during their induction, what information they were given, how did they find out where certain policies like equality and diversity policies are, and things like that. Does anybody have any thoughts about those questions? Do they agree with this? The questions, we're an education provider for the HCPC, and we have to meet their standards of education and training, and we have to ensure that the trainees meet their standards of proficiency. And the questions at the beginning of the verifier report form are ones that allow us to meet the standards of education and training. So because we're not actually face-to-face with the candidate, we can't meet every single one of our learners. We're asking the verifier to ask the questions so that we, the IBMS, can sign. Every year we have to put in an annual monitoring report to say that all of our learners meet all of the standards of education and training. So it's a way of us making sure that every single one of our learners meets those. But because we can't meet our learners face to face, it's the only way we can actually document that they do meet them. So They can't be changed because they do meet. If you have a look at the standards of education and training on the HCPC website, you will see that the questions are actually very closely aligned to those, almost word perfect. So that's why they're there. We can't get rid of them. We can't change them. There's very little flexibility around that. But I do know that a lot of people do comment on them, and because they've been the same for many years, people feel that it's time they were reviewed. Go for it, Mike. Sorry.
Just another comment coming. They are good icebreakers.
They absolutely are, yes. Yeah, that's how I tend to use them, is to get the candidate chatting. And with the new, just as an aside and off the back of that, with the new virtual verifications, the way that I do it is as soon as I'm signed up to a verification, I ask to see the portfolio. So they send me the electronic portfolio. I have a look through it, and then before I get to the official tour day, the proper examination day, I'll have a quick chat on the maybe a couple of days before, just 10 minutes with the training officer and the candidate, and just talk through what's going to happen on the day of the examination, the proper tour and all of these questions and everything. And I explain to them at that point why I have to ask these questions. So then when I get to the actual tour day itself, the examination day itself, they're expecting the questions, they know what to expect, and they've got their answers in their heads, and all the nerves are gone, and then they tend to kind of move much better into the tour. There's a much more gentle move across into their actual examination. So it may be worth, I don't know if any of you have tried doing that, but it might be worth thinking about that as well as a soft approach. Yes, Mike?
There's a comment coming from Paul. Some verifiers skip past them and I have to chase them to get them answered. And some verifiers spend a lot of time on them. There is a great variance.
There shouldn't be. They should absolutely be asked. They are very important questions. I would say that all verifiers should follow the line, the line of the report form, open with those, get those out of the way. One thing that people do pass comment on is that the questions are asked, and then next to it, we've just got 2 columns, yes or no. That's whether the standard has been met. We're expecting that they are standard responses. I would expect that people get the information during induction. I would expect that they're told where the various policies are during induction, all that kind of thing. So we don't need to know what the candidates' answers are, providing they are correct. We just need to know that they met them. So just tick the yes if they've met them. Obviously, if they don't know where the equality and diversity policy is, and they say that they've never heard of it and nobody's ever introduced them, then that's a serious matter, and that would be the standard not met. But you absolutely have to check that all of those things are in place. I'm wondering whether the verifiers who don't ask the questions maybe embed them at somewhere in the tour, or the questioning during the tour or something like that, so it's less sort of 2 separate areas. It's more embedded within just a general chit chat around the tour. It could be that they cover it like that, but every single verifier has to check that all of those things are in place. We wouldn't accept a report form where it wasn't flagged up. So go, Mike. Yeah.
A comment's just come in just before that. I can see where you're saying that to embed them in the tour, but one of the issues that could happen is you might forget about them, so you don't ask them. So if you ask all the relevant questions at the beginning, it's job done. And when you're on the tour, you don't have to think about having to ask the question that you should have asked at the beginning. So by doing them at the beginning, you've cleared the decks and you can just go on to the tour as the tour should be done.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think they should be asked at the beginning. And I would, absolutely, when I do all the training and everything, that's the way I train. Ask those questions, get them out of the way. Have the pre-chat if it removes all the nerves and everything, and it, it leads you straight in. But definitely ask the questions, tick that part of the form. You've already looked at the portfolio because you've had it beforehand, so you can move all the way down the portfolio part of the report form and then move straight into the tour. And the training officer leaves, the candidate does their tour, and then on the day itself, actually, you've just got to fill out the tour information, and then you can send the report form in. So really, it's a much faster way of processing the report forms and getting them written up, because you can do them just leave the tour part of it and just finish that off when you're doing after the candidate's done their tour and after you've given them the outcome. Finish that tour part off, send the report form straight into the team. So we should still be getting a much faster turnaround on the report forms as well, because of the way we're doing them virtually. Oh, plagiarism. Shall we ignore it? Is that okay? I think the little open mouth emoji is absolutely perfect for this one, because no, please, as a training officer, do not ever ignore plagiarism. It is a very serious thing if you find it, certainly with your role as training officer. If a candidate comes to you and they've plagiarized, please have the conversation with them. When I do the training, I always say to go back in a very gentle way, ask the trainee, ask the candidate how they created that piece of evidence, and give them the opportunity to own up to the fact that they left it till 10 minutes before they were due to meet you, and they actually hadn't done the piece of work, and they copied and pasted it just because they're scared of you and they wanted to turn up with a piece of work. Give them the opportunity to tell you how it happened. Because plagiarism is a very serious thing. And if you make an allegation to your candidate straight off with no lead in, the relationship between training officer and candidate will break down, will be fractured, and it's really difficult to get that back again. So if as a training officer you find that your candidate has plagiarized, and you can check it in Google, you can put up to 30 words into Google and it will respond if it finds it. Have that conversation with them, ask them how they created their piece of evidence, and try to tease out how they came to do the plagiarism. Most of our candidates, in fact, almost all of our candidates, will have recently been through higher education, so they will all be very, very aware of what plagiarism is. There are cultural differences in approach to plagiarism, so be very careful of that. But the best thing to do is have a gentle conversation with your trainee and tease out about the piece of work. Then explain to them that they shouldn't plagiarize, they can't be plagiarizing, and work with them to get a better understanding. There's lots of resources out there that will tell you what's plagiarism and what's poor academic practice. But definitely have that conversation, make sure they're very clear. If as a verifier you go to an assessment, a verification, or as an examiner, and you find plagiarism in a portfolio, you are well within your rights to put a stop to that examination, that assessment at the time, and the candidate will have to repeat that portfolio. We take it very, very, very seriously at point of assessment. So if you are the training officer and you do see plagiarism and you are tempted to look the other way because it's too much hassle to have that difficult conversation, and the verifier picks up on it, you will end up supporting your candidate through a new portfolio starting from scratch again. So please address it if you see it, and have the conversation. And if you're not sure about what plagiarism is, look it up, be familiar with the differences between plagiarism and poor academic practice, and then have that conversation with your trainee. So right back to the beginning then, how many pieces of evidence we use for the version 4 of the portfolio?
30.5.
Where have you got your half from, Mike? Okay, so that's just, let me stop sharing my screen. That was just a quick run through of some of the things that fall into my inbox, and some of the comments that I've had. Some of those have been drawn absolutely from emails that I've received. Mike, you've got some, because we were talking about some before we came on air. What ones have you got?
One of the ones I've heard, I've got a few, but the first one is that the 3 pieces of evidence should cover all the standards in that module. So evidence 1, 2, and 3 should cover all the standards in the first module. They don't have to. So the evidence can cover as many as possible. Obviously, if you can cover them all, great, but you don't have to cover every single standard in a module with all 3 pieces. And then the other one was that every standard in each module has to be evidenced. Currently, every standard doesn't have to be evidenced because it's signed off in the logbook. On a personal note, I think they should be evidenced, because there's no reason why you can't evidence every standard in a module. But certainly at the moment, you don't have to evidence every single standard in a module. I know it's been really quiet and people have been coming in with chats and thumbs up and whatever. Has anybody got any comments on those two before I go on to any more? Anybody want to have anything to say about it?
Hi, Mike. It's Vicky Moyes here. I would just say I agree with what you said about the sign off. So yeah, we know it's a rule. It doesn't have to be evidence in the portfolio for everything, although we try, if possible, to get the 3 pieces to cover as much as we can. But what we say to the training officers and the guys in the lab is, if you sign one of those boxes, I should be able to come to you and ask you what evidence you've got that you based your decision on, whether that evidence goes in the portfolio or not.
Yeah.
Which links in with how we do competencies these days and the idea of objective evidence. And it doesn't have to be anything super complicated or very formal. It could just be a QC record, a maintenance log. You know, we're filling things in the lab in all the time. There's probably some evidence there that the trainers or whoever signs that box, we say to them, you have to be able to tell me what that evidence would be if I was to ask for it.
I totally agree with you, Vicky, because at the end of the day, it's that signature on that piece of paper is authenticating that standard's being met. And at the end of the day, whether the evidence be presented in the portfolio or held if needed to be looked at, it's got to be evidenced. It can't just be, well, I'll sign you off. I know you'll be all right, but I haven't seen it, but I know you'll be all right, because that's not the way it works. And as Josh said at the beginning, the IBMS is an agent, as it were, for the HCPC, and the portfolio is the IBMS's presentation of how to achieve those standards. So if you falsify the record without actually seeing the evidence, then you're falsifying not the IBMS's documents, but you're actually falsifying the registration body's request. So it has got serious consequences, definitely, yeah. The next one I've got is Section 2, Module 4, which is Competence G, which is demonstrate proficiency in practical skills in cell science, blood science, infection science, etc., etc. You have to provide evidence for each of those. Well, you don't, because, for example, if you're working at Collindale, microbiology, we're just microbiology. We don't do cell science or blood science, so you wouldn't be able to get the evidence for them. So it's particular to the discipline that you're working in. I mean, obviously, if you're working in, say, blood sciences, so you've got biochem and hematology or any other variation, then yeah, you could put in evidence across the modules, but be careful, because unless they're meshed together, as we've discussed in the previous sessions, unless they are meshed together, they're going to be treated as separate pieces of evidence. So you could actually breach the magic number of 30. So just be a bit careful on how you present that evidence.
Mike, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
So Mike and I do the equivalence route portfolio assessment, and that's something that we've noticed in the evidence that equivalence candidates provide, is that they don't show that they have a sort of a general knowledge of the various different aspects of biomedical science. And in most of our trainees that go through the usual route, that sort of general knowledge of the various biomedical sciences, I hate myself for saying that, comes from your degree. So you will have done hematology, you will have done a bit of microbiology, you will have done cell path. So you have got that kind of knowledge of how they all mesh together. If you've got a candidate whose knowledge is maybe not that strong, something like a case study where the different disciplines have been involved can be a really useful way of meeting that particular one that Mike's just been talking about, because you can show the knowledge from your own discipline, but you can also draw in knowledge from the other disciplines to show that you can put it all together. And there is a sort of a holistic picture of the biomedical science disciplines. We do all interact at some level in some way, but not necessarily all the time. So that might be something you want to think about if you're struggling with a piece of evidence for that. Don't focus just on your own discipline. Sometimes just by thinking a little bit cleverly with a case study or something like that, you can actually draw in the other disciplines, or at least some of the other disciplines, because they've been involved at somewhere along a patient's path. Sorry, Mike, I jumped in there.
No, fine. That's what the session's all about. It's about, you know, having taken part and putting in your own comments and queries. The The next two are basically just a review, a reiteration of what we've done previously. So CPD, you know, I need the time or the money to be able to do it. Complete myth. You don't, obviously you need the time to be able to do it, but your time's there, your CPD's all around, and you don't need money to do it, and you don't need to go to big meetings or spend a few days out of the lab to go on a training session. So we have covered CPD before, but it's a myth about the time and the money. And similarly, sorry, go on.
Mike, can I jump in? We have got a video. I'm shamelessly promoting the other support hub videos, but there is one on CPD. So if this if Mike's sort of referring to CPD and the myths that are involved around that, please have a look at the video on that. It should be on the there's a link to it on the website. I'll quite shut up again.
Yeah, no. The other one is the follow-on from CPD. It's the reflection. You know, I'm not able to do it. I haven't got time to do it. You are reflecting every single part of the day. You put samples through a machine and they all work. You feel good about it. Reflect on it. You put 12 through and one doesn't work and you have to troubleshoot and it's, oh, you know, what's going on? You're reflecting subconsciously. Just put it down on paper. So the myth about CPD and reflection, they are myths. The next ones I've got are probably, yeah, they're largely focused around the placement aspect of people doing the portfolio and various other practices. One of the things I heard was that if I've done my placements in hematology, then I can only get a job when I graduate in hematology. That's completely wrong. That is a myth. It's a generic portfolio. So irrespective of what discipline you are training in, when it comes to seeking a post, a permanent post, you can go into any discipline. Again, going back to Collindale, purely microbiology, we've had placement students gone into biochemistry, blood sciences. So you don't have to go into a full-time post in a discipline that you were training in. So that again is another myth. Back onto the placement side is the portfolio has to be verified before the end of placements. Ideally, it should be. Similarly with the portfolio can be finished after placements. The thing to be considered is when you go back for final year, you're going to be hammered for final year. The last thing on your mind is going to be the portfolio. So ideally, get the portfolio finished and hopefully the verification done before you go back to final year. But over the years at Collindale, we've had variations on a theme and students have taken the portfolio back to final year and parked it because the final year demands has just been such that they haven't even looked at the portfolio. So it's a myth. You don't have to have it finished and you don't have to have it verified, but it's an ideal to actually get that done. It really would be.
Mike, can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Your evidence does have to be within 3 years
Oh, yeah.
of age at the point of verification. So that's something that you do need to bear in mind. And we still get pieces of evidence creeping in that are, 2012 and verifiers pick up on those. So I do think people still sneak them in regardless of the directive that they have to be within 3 years at the point of verification.
Yeah. The last one from me, and just before we started this session, Josh made a comment in respect to what I'm going to say, and it's open for discussion, and I've got strong feelings about this. To be able to do a placement, you must be on for a first or a 2-1. So if you're on for a 2-2 or a third, you can't do a placement. Certainly from Collindale's perspective, I don't care, well, at the time, because I'm not there anymore, but I didn't care what grade you were on. And again, if, as Josh mentioned, some universities make it a requirement that you're on for a 2-1 or a first, to me, that's absolutely outrageous. And I'll tell you why. In the years that we had the placements operational at Collindale, at the end of one placement year, one of the placement students came to see me and had a chat with me. We went in the canteen and he was a bit sheepish and said, "Oh, can I have a chat?" Really enjoyed my placement, absolutely fantastic, benefited so much about it. But I just want you to let you know that when I was in second year asking to do a placement, my personal tutor nearly had a heart attack because I was a bit of a rascal. Not his, my words, not his. Basically stayed on the degree by the skin of their teeth. Did what they had to do, didn't do what they didn't have to do. Hardly ever made a morning lecture. But to cut a long story short, that individual ended up with a fantastic portfolio, ended up with a 2-1, completed the specialist portfolio, and has done at least one master's. I think they're on the second, and is a senior scientist in a very, really good position. And they were basically on for almost getting a degree if you were lucky. So my view is, if you deal with universities, and I thought this was a myth until just before this meeting with Joss, if you deal with universities that are demanding a 2-1 or a first, I give them a wide berth, because to me, it's about giving people the opportunity. And we've all come across people, they are academically grifted, but you won't want them anywhere near you in a lab. So they might have the academic ability, capability, and they might be on for a 2-1 or a first. That doesn't mean to say they're going to be great in the lab. Similarly, the reverse of that, if you are really bad academically for whatever reason, and I failed exams in my career, if you are on a way where you're not onto a 2-1 or a first, give them the opportunity to flourish in the lab, because you never know what they might actually turn into. And as I say, we've had an example at Collindale where that individual was almost like on the borderline for being kicked out. And that person turned their life around. And that was because they were given the opportunity to do it. So my view is, and I thought it was a myth until I spoke to Joss at the beginning, my view is you shouldn't actually be on for a 2-1 or a first. It's given that individual or those individuals the opportunity to get there. I'll get off my other soapbox and I will leave that open for you guys to discuss. Yes, Tamina.
I've just got a comment. For the university I went to, it was a requirement that we would have to pass all of our modules in first and second year before we would be allowed to go on placement. Someone else has said it's the same requirement for them too. And I remember when I was at university, I think there were 15 placements available, but 45 people applied. So it was basically who got the best marks and who was selected from the interviews. It was the criteria to go on placement.
And yeah, and it will vary from university to university. I know of some labs who look at their applicants and only want the best, but this is a personal view of mine. I had a student who failed an exam in their second year and they came on placements, so they had to take their second year exam again, and were in a real state because they needed to work for the exam, but they wanted to do the placements. So what we did was we took them off the bench for a couple of months. We said, your degree is the priority. We gave them time to be able to study for the resit, protect the time in the library. They did a little bit of time in the lab when just as a bit of a break. And then again, another long story cut short, that individual went, they got the best mark they could possibly get because it was capped, and they went on to do the portfolio and fly. So I know there's rules and regs, but to me, you've got to look at the individual as well and the circumstances.
Thanks, Mike. So I guess we've got 15 minutes left. I think we'll open it up to everybody else. Has anybody else got any myths that they've found out the right answer and was surprised about? Or has anybody got any questions that they want us to answer to dispel any myths that they suspect. It's all about what you actually know and what you think you know. I think it's sometimes you don't know what you don't know until somebody enlightens you. So is there anything that anybody would like to put out there, or any questions they want answered?
You'll want to go for lunch.
We've busted every myth now. Okay, so I mean, we will be around until 2 o'clock. If you want to go, then that's absolutely fine. We've covered everything that I think we've all thought of. If nobody's going to throw anything into the mix for discussion, then that's absolutely fine. If you want to hang around and maybe ask us some questions in a sort of more private scenario, then that's absolutely fine as well. But I hope this has been useful. I hope we've covered. Sorry, Mike, go on.
No, I'm interrupting. I said I could turn the recording off, so it will be, completely between us.
Yeah. I mean, if you have got any very, very specific things that anybody wants to talk about, you all know where I am. Well, I'm in Suffolk at the moment, but you all know how to reach me through the IBMS. So if you've got anything that you want to discuss kind of on a one-to-one basis, that's absolutely fine. I hope we've managed to dispel some of the myths out there. I am always finding new ones. So if you come across something, if you hear somebody say something and you know it's not true, please correct them. And then also let me know that that the myth is going up. What I found is that truths tend to come out of Cold Bar Square and just go for about a mile, and then the myths tend to run right across the 4 nations and come back and hit me in email form. So it seems that they tend to get a bit of speed up and move across the country very, very fast. The one about the Institute only allow 1 sheet of A4 spread like wildfire across the country. And when I then went out to do training sessions, it was something that a lot of people were mentioning. So they do tend to go fast. So if you do hear of any, as I say, please correct people and then let me know that there is this misconception somewhere in the country that people believe something, and I can then look to getting the message out there a bit wider, which obviously always helps if we can dispel the myths at source. So I'd really appreciate that. If anyone else has got anything else to add, then please feel free to open the conversation up. Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, we'll stay here till 2. Do feel free to go off and have some lunch or anything. And we've got another one of these sessions on Thursday, which will be on verification questions and answers, I think. I've got to the stage now where I'm working out what day is it. Therefore, it's got to be, if it's Thursday, it's got to be verification. We'll see some of you back here on Thursday. Take care, everybody.